Yeah, so I shot a deer with a mechanical broadhead. We should probably talk about that. Hello everyone, thanks for coming outside with me today. No, this is not a clickbait video. This is a full breakdown on this arrow penetration, broadhead integrity build, building a bell curve industry arrow and its performance levels. And if you're a regular follower of the channel, you're probably freaking out in the comment section. Don't. Everything will be explained in this video, I promise. But there's been a lot of foreshadowing that something like this, a build like this, might happen. Picking, mechanical broadheads to be sold over the summer in my broadhead choice of 2021, as well as fixed blades, of course, which are my preferred. And we'll cover all this as we go through. But also, I talked about in a video about the industry that I made a couple months ago about how broadheads between mechanical and fixed, mechanical still outsell, at least in my shop, mechanical still outsell fixed 70 to 30, if not 60 to 40, somewhere in that flavor. So a boatload of whitetails, antelope, mule deer, and elk are being shot with mechanical broadheads every single year with high rates of success. And so I have to work with the guys that shoot these broadheads. I have to sell these products with confidence to these people as I work part-time in my local shop. Now, does that mean that's my preference and my preferred method? No, it is not. For those of you that don't follow the channel, or if you do, here's a quick refresher. This is my favorite style of arrow, just a standard diameter arrow, in this case a Sirius Supernova 2.0, worked flawlessly in this situation. There's a reason it's snapped in half, don't worry. But then I like to tip it with some flavor of 125 grain Magnus broadhead. In this case it's 125 grain Magnus buzz cut 4-blade model, which my quiver is full behind me. This is the only mechanical I was carrying in the quiver last week. If you're not a regular follower of the channel, I will put that video down in the description below. You can follow along with my 2021 deer season. And for those of you that do, you know that my kids were pretty sick. Then of course now my wife and I got pretty sick. And so I couldn't film this in the timing that I wanted. And in the interim, another YouTuber had to go film his hunt in Oklahoma and how he shot a deer with a mechanical broadhead and absolutely stonewalled it. Thanks a lot, Brandon. Like I started watching the video and it was an immediate text out to him and was like, "Dadgum you, I was gonna make that." But anyways, back to the topic at hand. This 31-inch, 9.3 grain per inch carbon tube from Sirius with lighted knock, 3 blazers, stock 12 grain insert, 125 grain point. On my scale comes out to about 466 to 468 grains, depending on the arrow that's within the batch. So that is definitely not a light arrow by any stretch of the imagination, but I also didn't do any tips and tricks to get there. This is a very stock build, 300 spine arrow. So a lot of guys that are in that 300 to 350 spine range are going to be around that 415 to 475 spine, or total arrow weight rather, that I'm sitting in as well. So I build a lot of these arrows for people. I work and tune on a lot of these arrows, these bell curve style arrows as I like to call them, where they're just very stock build and they're very easy to tune. That's the first thing I want to talk about before I even talk about the broadhead, the actual impact on the animal and everything else. I don't film in a super high frame rate with my camera, even though it can, but it limits a lot of the low light capabilities of a full frame camera like the Sony A7C. So I film in either 24 or 30p, usually 24. So you lose a lot of time, right, in between frames. But if you notice, this arrow is coming out of the bow absolutely flawlessly. And I will throw clips up onto your screen here, cut me away so that way you can actually see what I'm talking about as I go through the film. And I will cycle through some pictures, still images as well. The video footage, like I said, 24 frames a second, so there's a significant jump, but you can see how the arrow is tracking perfectly with that lighted knock. There is no weird paradoxing, there is no shifting up and down or wiggling to it. It is a dead nut straight line on the way to the critter at 25 yards is about the approximate distance of that shot. 25 yards is a very normal distance for whitetails, and this bow is shooting about 270, 275 feet a second. It's an Elite Energy 35 at 60 pounds at about a 31-inch draw. Now, I know you hear 31-inch draw. That's a lot of power stroke in behind that arrow, and of course it is, but that is not a fast bow. 60 pounds is not very high compared to a lot of guys shooting 70, 75, 80 pounds these days for some odd known reason, and that arrow is decently heavy. So with all those factors combined, you're only going to get about 270, 275 feet a second, which is what most guys are getting from that, 27 to 29 to almost maybe 30-inch draw length. Most guys aren't really pushing 290, 300 feet a second with a bell curve style arrow. And if you're shooting a really heavy arrow, you're definitely going to drop down to 60s, 50s, 40s, if not slower, depending on your draw length, poundage, and the overall arrow weight that you're building. So several things to take note of here as we go through the still images and freeze frames of this doe shot. You notice that I do have to stop her. I am very aware that she could keep walking, and I don't want, in the very short amount of time that that arrow leaves the bow, for her to keep walking and continue to move forward and me dead center punch her in the liver or back of lungs, which could be a long track job or even worse, into the guts, and I definitely don't want that. So I do stop her. Now, as a secondary note, I'm not wearing glasses today, and I wasn't wearing glasses on the hunt because I had broken them when I was trying to take care of my poor sick kids. So I didn't have any glasses on, so when I pulled up on this deer and I stopped her and I squinted my left eye in order to see out of my right, my pins just were a blurred mess and she was a blurred brown shape downrange about 25 yards. So that was my fault for the low light situation, and that's why the shot's a little bit more forward. But it's still exactly in the same general vicinity that I want, which is straight up the leg and lower 1/3. That's a big thing. I have a video about shooting for the exit hole. That's a big thing I talk about. And since this deer is very low to me, like I'm only about maybe 10-12 feet off the ground, and then she's pretty flat on with me, she's not down in a whole lot of topography. The camera makes it look different because the camera's above my head, but since she's pretty close to me in terms of eye levelness, I'm not angling it down, so I'm not aiming high on her body. I'm aiming it low, straight up the leg, so that way if she does duck into it, which she does, and if it was actually a little bit back, it'd been a really, really good shot, because when she's going to duck into that, it's going to hit close to that lower 1/3 or definitely into the middle of the lungs or heart, which of course is a really good shot. But this is clearly a monarch of a doe. She has been around. She was definitely on the older side, definitely a bigger body deer than we get here in the mountains of Pennsylvania, and she clearly has been shot at and has seen hunting situations before. She is moving before that arrow even gets halfway to her. So she has about 12 yards, 10 yards-ish of arrow distance still out of a relatively normal speed setup in particular, maybe a little on the slower side. She has 10 yards to start moving before that arrow gets to her. So you notice she's already ducking and rolling away to get out of the direction of the shot before the arrow is almost that halfway point. So she is already on the move. And this is what I talk about all the time with judging distance. That deer, I had to judge the distance. It was a very surprise angle. I didn't expect her to be in that particular spot. Thought she was going to be a lot closer as she worked down the spine of the ridge. So I had to guesstimate she was about 25 yards. And then I had to hold again lower, expecting her to duck. If you're shooting a bow that's doing 230 to 250 feet a second, and you're judging the yardage, and B, expecting a deer to move, a whole lot of stuff can happen in that 10-12 yard distance that I see here in this footage. Now it's a little bit blurry, but her gross motor movements are still very obvious. So this is why I will never recommend that you start pumping in 550, 600, 650 grain arrows. I think it's excessive, but B, if you're in one of these situations where you need to have a good shot angle and take a good shot placement shot where you're aiming dead center of the lungs, you're going up the backside of the leg and aiming in the lower 1/3, whether you're building a mechanical or my preferred, the fixed blade model arrow, you have to be making an ethical feet per second bow, and particularly in an unknown distance situation where animals are going to be moving 1000% of the time. So let's actually get into the impact and then the actual autopsy of this shot. So she starts to duck down and roll out of the way, and the arrow makes impact. You notice with the dot, like I said, it's a little bit forward, and I'm sorry the footage is blurry, just nature self-filming with a camera that's really good at autofocus. It picks up that little branch in the way. She's starting to duck and roll away, and you see that orange dot. It's really actually a good height-wise shot, it's just a little bit forward. And so it ends up catching her right in the middle of the scapula ridge. If you're unfamiliar with a deer scapula looks like, here you go. And the outer side where it kind of flowers off or petals off, as I like to think of it, kind of like a shoehorn, that actually is really thin. And you can get through that with most normal arrow weight setups, bell curve style arrows. It's actually not that bad. But the spine that runs right down the center as it goes down into the knuckle, connecting down into the lower two sections of the leg, that area gets incredibly dense and incredibly thick. I don't care what arrow or broadhead you are shooting at a distance like 25, 30, 35 yards. That is a tough spot to hit directly, first of all, which was unintentional on my part, but even more importantly, it's really hard to get directly through, because by the time that arrow gets that deer, they're going to be taking the energy down and away with them, which is exactly what she's doing. She is absorbing this energy, much like if you put a bag target up in a stand and it's allowed to swing or pivot, or a punching bag for a boxer or MMA fighter. They're kicking that bag because it's absorbing and moving, and it's relieving the energy on their body, on their fists, and on their legs as they're interacting with the bag and in the weights. So I don't care if you're shooting a fixed blade or mechanical, 400 grains or 600 grains, if you hit that shoulder when that deer is ducking and moving away, you are not breaking it. You're going to glance off. Now, I was very fortunate, and a lot of people that do glance off it sometimes do get fortunate like me, but a lot of them don't. I was very fortunate that when this broadhead hit, and as you see, I have not cleaned this arrow. It is exactly stock. The broadhead is still spinning true, which is like super impressive. So I'll throw some of the stills here on the screen. This broadhead, and just based off of the chisel tip of this Grim Reaper razor tip here, it looks like it makes contact here on the trocar style tip, and it does bend the one blade, which I don't care what broadhead you're shooting. If it's a $40 or less for a 3-pack, and this is why I like Magnus so much, because Magnus has that lifetime warranty, no nonsense replacement warranty, whereas I'm out of money with this Grim Reaper, but that's just the nature of the beast with the lion's share of broadheads on the market. When this arrow impacts, it clearly breaks into that side of the femur. The one blade deploys, of course, on the hide, because there's a perfect triangular hole in the hide, which I didn't get a great picture of because I'm filming in the dark and trying to clean out a deer and drag it out and get to work the next day. So it does bend the one blade, bends about halfway up, but you still see the broadhead does close in on itself, and it still opens completely fully functioning. There is no massive chatter in the blades, which is pretty impressive for all the meat and potatoes, if you will, that it went through. So it goes in and it breaks in on that front ridge of the scapula, which again is the toughest bone to break on that front part of the animal outside of its spine. So, and you're trying to aim right in that general area of the shoulder, because that's of course where your heart and lungs are. You don't mean to hit them in the spine. Sometimes you do encounter that ridge of the scapula of the shoulder, or in that knuckle if you're really unfortunate. But this arrow, this 466, 468 grain arrow, has so much force and has so much impact that it knocks this, I'm guessing, a 3-year-old doe, 120 pound, 110 pound doe, clean off her feet. I know, those of you that live in the Midwest, you're like, 120 pound doe is not big at all. I get it. Come hunt in the mountains sometime where these deer live off twigs and acorns year round. Okay, just, it's not a big deer for where you live, but it's a big deer for us. And if you're from Florida and you shoot German Shepherds, you definitely understand it's a bigger deer. So this arrow has enough force and enough impact in flight with her still ducking and rolling away to literally knock her off her feet and completely just disable this shoulder. It doesn't break any bones, but it disables this shoulder. Then when she tries to get up, she ends up slipping and rolling, and that's when she rolls over the arrow and snaps it off. Now, of course, the image is blurry and I can't get a better still frame, but it looks like in the act of rolling over that even before she rolls onto the shaft and snaps it off, the arrow is already starting to poke through on the exterior side, right where it does exit, which is right behind the elbow joint on the far side of the animal. This is where I really wish I had the focus perfectly nailed, because we could actually see if that was just a fur shadow, a light shadow, or if it's actual blood coming out of the animal. It's unfortunate we don't know, because the only thing I know is in the later autopsy, when I come to the animal and this half of the arrow was sticking out the one side. Did it go through partially before she even rolled onto it? I'm guessing it definitely, obviously, was help with it rolling onto it. But as in the act of it rolling onto her like that, it goes and severs this elbow tendon. Again, more stills up on your screen. It severs that elbow tendon. You can see all of the blood clot that's up in that elbow, right up in that socket, and it completely renders both of her legs absolutely useless. She tries to get up off the ground. She ends up bucking. Both of her legs are completely folded underneath her, and she ends up just rolling down. Now, you think, oh, wow, we hit a lot of bone. That's great. What about the goodies in between? Well, 2 of the blades severed the top of the heart, and the one cut off the windpipe as it goes into the lungs. Like I said, we're very far forward. So we didn't actually hit lung. We hit the top part of the heart, maybe top part of the first 2 lobes of the lungs on either side, but we definitely put a big slit into the windpipe that I did find when I was cleaning her out. I cut up way far up inside the neck to try to preserve that windpipe. I'm sorry, again, no pictures. It's really hard to get pictures in the dark when you're covered in blood from, eviscerating an animal. Oh man, YouTube is gonna love this video. So we have a full frontal shoulder impact, the worst place you could possibly hit, next to the knuckle that's right down at the end of the spine there of the ridge of the scapula. That's the next worst place, or the top worst place rather. And then as you move further and further away, it gets less and less dangerous. But I mean, we're just maybe 3 inches away from that. It's the thickest part of the bone in the front part of the shoulder on that whitetail doe. We have a full frontal impact there on a deer that is ducking down and rolling away, knocks her clean off her feet, hits her to the ground. She gets in through with the arrow poking through on the other side, disabling both arms. I mean, both shoulders are completely disabled. She doesn't kind of run with the arrow in her. It is completely disabling on both sides. And this isn't like some little 40, 50, 60 pound little fawn. This is a full grown 3, maybe even a 4-year-old doe. This deer is here to stay. She is a tough cookie, and it completely disables her. This isn't some 600, 700, 800 grain arrow that we're shooting at 15 yards. This is a public land, whitetail, Pennsylvania, high pressure hunt, an older deer, a normal bow hunting setup with a normal arrow, and a mechanical broadhead, which, like I said, 70-30 or 60-40 that I sell in my shop. So the reason why I'm making this video and the reason why I hunted with this one-time arrow, if you will, because I'm going back to my tried and true fixed blade. I think I got incredibly lucky here, but I'm going to go back to Magnus easily for the rest of the season, no questions asked. But this is a viable arrow setup, and I want to make this incredibly clear. That's really the purpose of this video, because if you go onto Facebook, you go onto message boards, you go onto YouTube, heck, even guys like me, I think you should be shooting a fixed blade broadhead. I really think anybody can. They're super easy to tune. They're not that big of a deal. The structural integrity that I have here is probably better than 90% of the mechanical broadheads that are on the market. I think if you're going to shoot a mechanical, at least shoot a Grim Reaper, which is made in the United States. Magnus is made in the United States. There's a lot of great USA made broadheads, although Magnus does have the full lifetime, no questions asked warranty. So why would you shoot anything else? But I build this style of arrow and I sell this style of arrow with mechanical broadhead, 400 to 475 grains, to literally dozens, if not hundreds of people every single year, between working in the shop and, of course, making videos on YouTube. This is still a very, very viable setup. However, in order to maximize this setup, and this is what I've always talked about, you have to have a well-tuned bow and a well-tuned bow and arrow relationship. Like I said at the beginning of this video, this arrow is tracking perfectly out of this bow. Perfect bullet hole through paper. I have the video on the easiest tuning method of all time. That's exactly what I did for all of these arrows, and the penetration and the literal knockdown power speaks for themselves. Well, anyhow, I have rambled on for way too long in this video. If you have any comments, whether they be hurtful, insightful, helpful, or you just want to say you like pepperoni pizza, drop it down in the comments section below. Or if you want to send me a nasty email, averagejackarchery@gmail.com, or Facebook or Instagram @averagejackarchery, feel free to do so. I love to hear from you. Or if you have a question about, building normal arrows, or, tuning American-made broadheads and products that don't cost $90 or $100 for a 3-pack, just hit me up, whatever. But I do hope you are able to get outside, enjoy the sport of archery hunting. If you so choose, hopefully you can bloody a few arrows yourself this fall. The rut's coming right around the corner here in Pennsylvania, the end of October, beginning November. I'm getting really excited to get out in the woods. Oh, I'm also headed to Indiana starting next week. I'll be out there for several days with Derek Craig from New Day Outdoors. Check his channel places here. And, yeah, I hope you're able to get outside, enjoy the sport of archery hunting if you so choose. Definitely enjoy God's beautiful creation, and we'll get to see you next time.